Hey, I'm Tom. Thanks for checking out this video, and hope the content is a benefit. So, Christianity is struggling in multiple ways. Nothing's perfect, and there's always seasons and ups and downs, but we're in a moment. Jordan Peterson, a clinical psychologist and professor of psychology who came into the public eye a few years ago, has faced some serious personal trials as of late. I think what he needs is what Christianity has, and I think what Jordan Peterson has is what Christianity needs. And so I just have some thoughts that I want to flesh out, and we'll see where we land. So to dig in, where are we? Where is Christianity right now? Francis Schaeffer, a Christian philosopher, said maybe about 50, 60 years ago, he has a quote from one of his books: "In our modern forms of specialized education, there's a tendency to lose the whole in the parts. And in this sense, we can say that our generation produces few truly educated people. True education means thinking by associating across the various disciplines and not just being highly qualified in one field as a technician might be. I suppose no discipline has tended to think in more in fragmented fashion than the orthodox or evangelical theology of today." That's a devastating critique. So 150 years ago, a philosopher named Friedrich Nietzsche proclaimed the death of God. It was an observation, and one that, even though he was a huge critic of Christianity, he saw as detrimental to Western society. This is because he saw the position of God intricately tied to the fundamental framework of our morality and values. I believe he was absolutely correct. What we have watched and are watching unfold is the continued effects of the severance between the concepts and values rooted in the nature of God and how we view, understand, and interact in our world. The most fundamental things about humanity and its significance are being questioned in the mainstream. There is a great pushback against the most basic elements that make up humanity and our existence. Things like sexuality, justice, love, marriage, etc. are all up for grabs. I love this moment because I love looking at things at the foundational level and at the most basic level. At the same time, it's extremely unsettling. Not only are we questioning and criticizing the most basic things about life, there seems to be a deep resentment and hatred present that is more interested in tearing down rather than making new. Even the most conservative or traditional among us who aren't questioning or criticizing seem to be just as disconnected from the foundational elements. This is because they are comparing themselves to the most liberal or those that are deconstructing, but they don't see the great gap between themselves and the truths and realities that have been forgotten and lost from decades, if not centuries ago. You can tell this by the lack and inadequate response to the questions and criticisms that we are facing today. We don't see or understand how the most fundamental elements of reality are rooted and tied to the eternal good, right, and beautiful. We dispensed with God a long time ago. Now that He or the concepts and framework that make God up are gone, we're left to our own ideas, beliefs, and value systems. Our moral convictions aren't gone. Those are strong. This is because being made in the likeness of God, we are moral by nature. The significance of morality remains, but with the standard and origin gone, we are left to make our own morals. Not a good plan. So how did we get here? And why is Christianity in such bad shape? When the scientific revolution happened several centuries ago, it seems clear that it was birthed as a result of the Christian worldview. Namely, that a particular God created in particular ways, patterned after himself, so that when we study and learn, we could expect to find what is true, good, and beneficial. There is meaning and significance in nature and in learning about nature because it is tied to what is eternally meaningful and significant, its source. God works. He functions rightly, perfectly, eternally. When he designed, he used himself as the blueprint, which means the created order works and functions. There's continuity between God and his creation. Also, everything is connected and in relationship to some degree with everything else. Because that's the case, when I learn about something, I can benefit and the knowledge becomes useful for me or for us or for history. So people who were motivated to do the science were working out of this theological Christian framework. As time progressed, science in the scientific domain developed to the point where its discoveries and knowledge became extensive. Science began to stand on its own 2 feet, if you will. It matured and became autonomous. At the same time, there became a severance between science and the Christian theological framework that once produced it. With the well-developed science, the religious domain began to be viewed as outdated, primitive, disconnected from this new way of seeing and knowing. Truth that was once centered in the theological began to shift and was now being pulled into this new framework of knowledge and being centered in the scientific domain. So not only is the chasm growing between the religious theological domain and science, but truth is being understood more and more primarily through the scientific lens. And that's a problem. So what is wrong with Christianity precisely? Christianity today has rightly worked to bridge the gap over the decades between science and religion, believing that they are compatible and are meant to go hand in hand. But I believe Christianity has overcompensated in its response. So now religious explanation and its view of reality and even of its scriptures is primarily seen through a scientific lens. Its modern worldview in that truth it's a modern worldview in that truth is regulated primarily to what we can know scientifically. It began with good intention in that we want to demonstrate how the religious explanation is true scientifically, but we seem to have taken what is primarily theological and shoved the entirety of the explanation into the scientific domain. That's a problem. Because Christianity is an explanation of all things. The theological, the psychological, the political, the personal, the philosophical. Not only is theology not just a field of study alongside other comparable fields, it is the queen domain of study which all other domains of study come and are built on. So where are we now? Society has moved beyond and past the modern worldview, which defines truth by what is fact, what can be understood scientifically, and has moved into a postmodern framework. This postmodern framework questions and critiques the modern and scientific framework. Postmodernism is a loss of faith in the truth being limited to the scientific domain. Christianity now is trying to engage or connect with the postmodern worldview with this old modern framework, stating things like, Jesus was a historical figure. He actually died on the cross. He literally resurrected from the dead. You should believe it because it's factual. The postmodernist listens and says, "So what? What does that have to do with anything? What does it mean for me emotionally? What does it mean politically? How does it get worked out philosophically?" Because Christianity is stuck in the modern framework, that truth is contained in the factual or scientific. When trying to engage with our current society, it's not resonating. And we aren't able to truly speak in this moment. So when's the last time you heard a sermon, a Bible study lesson on the first few passages of Genesis where there weren't any scientific references? There weren't any references to scientific dating, geology, archaeology. I really can't think of one. I have no interest or intention in dispensing with science. It has its place and is needed. It's a part of God's composition of the cosmos and creation. And the scripture goes to great lengths to insist on the historicity and legitimacy of its explanation. But its explanation isn't stuck there. That's not the only framework that the truth is defined by. It's too narrow. We need to hear Francis Schaeffer's critique. Our explanation of theology and the narrative of the scriptures and Jesus has been stuck in one domain. Because that's the case, it seems that our theology being able to resonate with reality is very weak and shallow. In comes this Professor Jordan Peterson. He has a quote. It's a truism, and probably an oversimplified one, that since the dawn of the scientific revolution, a wedge has been driven through the heart of our society, such that the moral systems that we use to unite us, so those would be religious systems fundamentally, have been subject to an intense critique from the scientists. And it's a pretty effective critique. Even if you have maintained a traditional faith, the scientific onslaught is no joke. And that's a problem as far as I can tell, because the problem is that you are still left with the problem of how you should act. The philosopher Nietzsche, he would say that we are running on the fumes of Christianity in the West. His idea was that if you wipe out the metaphysical beliefs, eventually you wipe out the whole system, because you have knocked out the cornerstone. And it might take a long time for the thing to shake and fall, but it will. Close quote. Jordan Peterson, a psychologist, philosophical thinker, theological admirer, is studying the Christian narrative and claiming that it is the truest thing he has found. He believes it, to the point that he begins aligning his life and building his own personal life on its explanation. The Christian narrative becomes his worldview and framework for reality. It becomes central for him to understanding all things. God being triune, man being marked by the ultimate good because of his likeness to God, and the ultimate contaminator because of pride, resentment, and deceit. Jesus being the Logos, the living Word, God in flesh, who suffers, dies, and is resurrected, becomes the central framework for Jordan Peterson's understanding of everything. The fascinating thing is Jordan Peterson isn't a Christian in the classical or mainstream sense. He doesn't go to church. He doesn't claim to have a conversion experience. And maybe most importantly, he's more agnostic related to God's literal existence and the historical accounts of Jesus described in the New Testament. Yet, his understanding and value of the concepts, teachings, truths put forth by Christianity, and his work to align himself to them, trusting and believing them, is quite remarkable. One of the reasons why somebody like him is difficult to grasp for the Protestant or evangelical Christian today is because we have gotten stuck in primarily understanding our Christianity in the scientific sense. Again, Christianity's narrative insists on the actual literal historical events surrounding the birth, life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. And yet our understanding and explanation of how that resonates with all aspects of human existence and arenas of life has withered to cliches. So Jordan Peterson, as a psychologist doing philosophy, digging into theology, is studying Christianity and discovering that it resonates. It works. It's true in all of these varying fields, including politics, family, human emotions, psychology, philosophy, and so on. A few years ago, he did a lecture series through the book of Genesis. He rented out a theater of a few thousand people and lectured line by line, verse by verse, through the entire book of Genesis. The people who showed up for these lectures were not evangelical Christians. You could say these were postmodern, everyday people, a lot of them young adults, and many, if not most of them, men. That's an amazing thing because churches have no idea how to get men to come to church. I lost count of how many articles I've read on why men don't attend church and how to attract men to church. Yet, here is this professor who does this Bible series with no grand show, no music, no elaborate production, just lecture. And the masses pour in. All of his lecture material is on YouTube, on his YouTube page. The first lecture from that Genesis series is currently at 8.9 million views on YouTube. So why is Jordan Peterson resonating? He's doing precisely what Francis Schaeffer stated was missing. He's understanding and explaining Christianity across fields of study and in the multiplicity of ways that make up human life. Jordan Peterson is brilliant, no doubt, but by his own admission, it's the significance of the truths of Christianity that seem to be resonating so deeply in a time and with a people that are so far from the depths and riches of theological thought. A few years ago, after listening to some of Peterson's lecture series online, I stated to my dad, who was a pastor of a Baptist church in the heart of Chicago at the time, that we would have people show up to our church because of Jordan Peterson. Sure enough, a few months later, there was a young law student who began to attend. She gave her life to Jesus, joined the church, and stated that she had never been to church before coming to ours. She said she had been listening to Jordan Peterson and was compelled to attend church. Christianity. Pastors, theologians, elders, Bible teachers, Bible student. We need Jordan Peterson. We need to hear how stale, disconnected, irrelevant, dead our explanations are of Christian. Our explanations are of Christianity. Our sermons, our lectures, lessons are strung together with cliches. It's so bad that Christians themselves don't know that what the cliches mean anymore, let alone a completely secular society. It's pitiful, to say the least. Our attempts to apply biblical theology and doctrine philosophically, psychologically, politically, socially is embarrassing. I've heard your sermons. I've listened to your analogies. I've seen your cool, creative illustrations. We need to go to work. I believe Christianity is the truth. Its power and reach will never diminish. That's demonstrated constantly, even in our secular Western age. But we need to recognize the times and not settle for just the powerful truth in a cliche. Not only is our world in need, but our very own souls are starving for it as well. God is infinite and knowable at every point. Knowing that doesn't make up for acting, living, and learning like it's true. Start digging. You may be absolutely blown away by what you find. And Jordan Peterson might be a great place to start. Jordan Peterson. You have a grasp on the concept of God and truths of Christianity that I haven't encountered until hearing you. My understanding and value of the nature of God and primacy of Christ, the Savior, Lord, the Logos, has exploded because of your insights, explanations, and values. It seems to me that the concepts and explanations being given by Christianity of the highest value insist on them not remaining or being stuck in concept or precept only. I learned that from you. There is an insistence that they be wrapped in flesh, be moved from the conceptual to the actual. Christianity over the last 2,000 years has just done too much work to demonstrate the validity, the historicity, the reasonable reality that Jesus existed and was who he claimed he was. People like William Lane Craig, Lee Strobel's The Case for Christ, C.S. Lewis, Timothy Keller. There we have historians, apologists. Just to give a quick sample, showing that we are sitting here in Christianity overloaded with argument, reason, evidence that point to Jesus being literal. We got the historical, textual studies down. It's time you gave it a look. The meaning and significance of your current worldview and beliefs that you understand to be centered in Christian thought are hanging in midair. They will prove to be hollow and empty if they aren't rooted in an actual, literal, eternal being. The concepts that you value and that are found in Christian doctrine as the highest and deepest truths, but don't move themselves from the concepts to the literal, physical, historical, are far less significant, if not infinitely less significant truths than what Christianity, its gospel authors, insists they are. If there is no intention in the beginning and no observing standard at the end, then any adopted so-called meaning in the middle is technically illusory. You have rightly identified the human being as the ultimate good, made in God's likeness, and as the evil corruption being disconnected from God by pride, resentment, and deceit. You have spent years now working at trying to bridge the gap back to God, and the working out phase has its place. But there first has to be an initiating element, a legal contract, a change of status, just like an adoption process or a marriage union. Law first, then relationship and living and acting out. That's the pattern of the Bible narrative. The law first, then the embodiment, the incarnation. That's the process for us finding salvation. Legal contract first, being justified, then working out our beliefs in real time and space. Jesus makes the legal element possible of being justified and made right, being born again, transitioning from death to life when he dies, is buried, and resurrects, literally. If we literally ask him to save us and have his punishment for sin be in our place, we become justified. We are made right. We are adopted into God's family. Then your meaning of life and value of the theological concepts and their relevance to all of life will have an actual eternal foundation. Jordan Peterson, you need what Christianity has. And it's Jesus of Nazareth, Lord and Savior. That's my appeal to Christianity, and that's my appeal to Jordan Peterson. Thanks.